Hello, my name is Woody. This is Change in the House of Pods, a podcast about Deftones. Today, my guest is Jeremy Bolm, frontman for Touche Amore and host of the first ever podcast, which we'll talk about quite a bit today. And I'll tell you what, if you haven't listened to the first ever podcast before now, I bet you end up checking it out after this. Jeremy is thoughtful, curious, and extremely down to earth, all the makings of a great podcaster, and he's been a Deftones fan since Adrenaline. We're going to talk about how he found Deftones and the couple of times he saw them live early on. We're going to talk about what drew him to the band to start and his favorite albums. These are, of course, things we always talk about here. But Jeremy's experience as a musician and as a frontman is pretty enlightening. I mean, he's going to say some stuff about recording and performing that are truly insightful. When you think about Deftones or any band, for that matter, who performs heavy music with yelling or screaming vocals. And it's pretty cool. He'll offer some interesting comparisons on Deftones versus Korn. He will, at one point, suggest Deftones are godlike on stage. And he just bought a Peloton, which is also fun. This is my conversation with Jeremy Bolm.
I joined the masses on being a very basic person, and my girl and I got a Peloton, and it just got delivered. So that was the big to-do today. It was supposed to be delivered in a few weeks, but they had like an early appointment open up, and then they just jumped around the schedule. And you and I had talked about too, and I saw the thing, and it was like, oh fuck! And actually, it ended up dropping off early, so now it's here already. So this is good. Now I just want to play with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think that makes you basic at all. I'd be super geeked about getting the Peloton. Of course, I barely get to exercise at all. You know what I mean? Like leaving the house anymore. I live in Minnesota, so it's still freezing cold.
Oh my God.
So it's like really prohibitive to go outside and or to go anywhere anymore, honestly. But to exercise would be like a great joy.
Yeah. Oh man. It took forever for it to arrive. Like it wasn't like we ordered it in January and it was supposed to arrive almost in April, but they had an appointment open up, and it was just like, it's gnarly because for someone like myself, I don't know if you deal with this, but like I have like extreme buyer's remorse about everything. So paying for something, like putting a down payment on something that's like, normally not something I would spend that much money, want to spend so much money on, but and then like having like months in between ever even getting to enjoy it or see it, you're just like, oh, for months, like I hope this was the right idea.
I can totally empathize with that experience. And then traditionally, like exercise equipment just in general has the potential to just sit and collect dust. So like that's a whole other layer with the Peloton, which is an investment. Like that's no small investment. And you're rolling the dice on like, will we use this?
It's one of those things where, my girl and I, we've been together, where she's my fiance actually, but like, we're doing this, like we're both committing to this shit. Like I normally run and, I'm lucky. I'm privileged to be in Southern California. So like I usually run at night, but I'm getting older. I'm about to turn 38. My knees aren't what they were. My shins aren't what they were. So the idea of not running on cement is kind of nice to me right now.
Wow,
so.
we're about the same age then. I'm also almost 38 next month, and I have the knees of like a 68-year-old man. So I can totally.
When's your birthday?
April 4th.
April 6th.
Nice. Couple of Aries. Talking 80? About Deftones today.
Are you 83?
Yeah,
83. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah, we're right there. So we probably have a very similar connection to the Deftones if our age is like right there.
Potentially
with when we found them and all that sort of stuff.
I have a feeling that you probably got onto them, that you were clued into them a little bit earlier than I am, because I was still I came to the Midwest as a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old. So things take a little bit longer to get here, as I'm sure you're aware, than things break on the West Coast.
Sure.
Okay, well, let's dive into it then, because I do want to talk about Deftones, but it's also extremely rare that I've gotten a fellow podcaster on the mic with me. So I'd love to hear about the first ever podcast and what made you decide to jump in such crowded waters.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, not the most original thought process for a generic fucking guy in band who has, all his livelihood stripped from him and the need to converse with like-minded, people and just, wanting that sort of connection. But no, I mean, to be fair, years ago, I did a radio show that was hindered by the fact that it was like through an app. It was, I don't know if it even still exists, but it was like a radio based app called Dash Radio. And I did that for maybe 20 odd episodes. And it was kind of, I enjoyed it, but it was kind of a nightmare in the sense of it was located in Hollywood. The studio was, I had to, for people listening, you can imagine how stressful this is in Los Angeles traffic. Pick up my guest, whoever they are, whoever was in town that night. It was always musicians, but like if they're on tour, like pick them up post sound check, pre-doors, which is about 4:00 rush hour, drive them to Hollywood, do the show, and drive them back. But it was just like, it was a nightmare. So after, several weeks of massive stress, I was like, I can't do this. I'm just going to do a podcast. So I bought all the shit. I bought this microphone. This was like in like 2015, probably 14, maybe. And, got all the stuff, did a handful of interviews in my apartment. But then I don't know if you've dealt with this yourself, but I can't be trusted. So like, as soon as I recorded the episode and like did the fun part, which is the conversation, I was like, edit, fuck that. And never put them out. Like I genuinely tried to edit an episode, and I can't be trusted. Like I'm really meticulous and like stress out about like every little thing. So any moment of awkward silence or any like of the I tried to take out. And by the time I listened back to what I had done to the episode, it sounded so Frankenstein that I was like, I can't do this. Like I need to be able to pass this off to somebody else. I have a hard time delegating work because I'm kind of a control freak. You mentioned you're an Aries. You could relate to this. So like, yeah, like I had a really hard time, so basically I never put those episodes up, and I've been ashamed of myself ever since. They just have sat on a hard drive. And so we finished our last record. We finished recording it last year. And we recorded it. We finished recording it in like probably had everything turned in by like May. So I had the summer looking ahead and was like, I have no life. There's no tours. There's nothing. Like I should do something. So the company that we're managed by, it's called Rock Nation. It's like Jay-Z's company, but don't worry, we have nothing, or not even worried. Just don't assume that we have any attachment to that. They probably don't even know who we are. We're the smallest fish in that pond. It's fun to pretend that we have a connection there, but we, basically our manager has an office there and he's awesome. But so this company was partnering with Rock Nation, like a podcast company. So my manager hit me up and was like, hey, are you still interested in doing a podcast? I said, I am. And he goes, well, this company is willing to basically, like, for lack of a better phrase, like do the parts that I can't be trusted to do. So the show, as a producer, I come on, I'm interviewing artists of all kinds, whether they're painters, poets, musicians, actors, showrunners, photographers, tattoo artists, any kind of art. It interests me, especially if it's something that I'm not very familiar with. And I talked to them about their first experiences in their art form that basically led them to where they are today. So I interviewed like a cartoonist for the New Yorker. So it was like, what was it like going into that first pitch meeting, and like, how is, like that kind of a thing. That's sort of like genesis of what got them there, the awkward stories, or even, it's come to be kind of a really motivational show, which is kind of the coolest thing to get that kind of feedback. The amount of people that are like, this is like one of those occupations I've been interested in. It's like, it's nice to hear shit ain't easy for everybody. So that's basically been the drive. So I'm thankful to have a company that, there's a guy who records the show, and then he edits it, and then they make images and all that sort of stuff. And I'm very thankful because this podcast racket, it's time consuming, right?
Yeah,
Talk to me about it. It's time consuming.
Well, it's a lot of work, and I definitely can appreciate the things that you're saying about the editing, and and everything else. And then let alone like, are people listening and are they responding? And but you're right though, the conversation is the coolest part. And I love that idea of digging into the beginning. I think those things are always the most those Genesis stories, because they really normalize people that we otherwise think of as rock stars or people who we are, I don't know, disconnected with for whatever reason. You know, we don't see their experiences as one that is achievable or whatever. And doing those sorts of things, I can see how that would totally be motivational. I can totally feel that.
Yeah, you know, and I feel like, you know, not to sound, you know, we just realized we're both the same age, but like not to sound our age, but you know, I think that a lot of the younger generation is so used to like, you know, what's called instant gratification, that like the idea of the struggle might be a little lost on people, where it's like, oh, I started a band, I don't understand why we're not already opening these big shows, like, you know, stuff like that. It's like I started a band, like why do I have to sleep on these hardwood floors for 3 years, you know, like playing to 12 people, like all that sort of stuff. It's like, no, you all of these people go through this, and it's nice to hear, and it's nice to hear, you know, and the humble beginnings, like everyone you talk to, like those are the best stories. Your best stories come from when you're struggling, or when, you know, when you in the moment they're terrible, but when you talk about them later, it's like you can't help but like chuckle at most of them, just being like, oh God, and then this happened. So yeah. You know, it's been enjoyable.
I can't believe you have like a bunch of conversations that you never put out. They're just on a hard drive somewhere. They're just sitting somewhere collecting dust.
Yeah. And those conversations were just like, and I didn't have it wasn't this show. It was basically like, you know, the least original idea, which was basically like my small version of like what Mark Maron does. It was just like, you know, a generic conversation about someone's life, which is fine. There's plenty of those podcasts out there. It certainly didn't have like an original take, but I'm very gracious to who I was nice enough to come over to my house. Most of them will probably end up coming on the show eventually. Some of them already had, like I interviewed like Frank Turner, which was awesome. That one never, you know, I never did anything with that. I interviewed like Aaron from Me Without You, Jordan from Lot of Speed, like just, you know, people that were in town and nice enough to come over to my stupid apartment. And, you know, I've apologized to each one. I've apologized to each one of them individually, being like, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Yeah, and I wasted your time. One of the people is my buddy Chris Farron, who I just had on my show. He's a musician. And I was telling him, I apologized to him at the beginning of the show. And he was like, no, honestly, like, I'm glad it's not out, because, you know, like we all have done a lot of growing in the last, you know, 5-6 years. Like, yeah, I'd rather, it's probably best it just stays away. Not that he's said anything problematic, obviously, but like, it just, you know, I'm a much more adult person now. You know,
that's an interesting way to look at it. Well, it's really cool to think about though, because in a sense, while they're, you know, available forever, podcasts really are sort of a moment in time, or trying to capture moments in time, I guess.
Yes.
To do whatever.
Little time capsules.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's cool. I'm enjoying your podcast. I was just listening to your conversation with Chase from Gate Creeper.
Yeah,
that was really cool. Are you guys doing those? Are you doing those recordings, since you've got somebody else doing the editing for you? Are you doing those in pretty much like close to published time, or are you racking up conversations and putting them in together in advance?
I used to just do one a week, and then that would come out the next week. But because I think I've gotten sort of a little bit ahead of myself, now I'm a couple weeks ahead. I only have 2 conversations on the books right now. I'm interviewing Julian Baker on the 8th, and then I'm interviewing my pal Sam Carter, who sings in that band Architects, on the 15th, because they just put out a new record. Both of them just put out new records, so I'm trying to rack them. But next week's episode is actually with this guy Eric Appel, who is a TV director. So he's done episodes for like The Office, Silicon Valley, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He actually, do you remember the Andy Milonakis show?
Yeah, I do remember the Andy Milonakis show.
That was his roommate, and they started that show together. And he was the head writer on that show. That was his first show ever that he worked on.
Wow, that's
so like. Cool. Yeah, so he has like this crazy, you know, a bunch of wild, cool stuff that he basically, when Funny or Die started, that you know, like the network Funny or Die that like Will Ferrell owned, that's when he became a director. So like a lot of those, you know, skits that we all saw, as like viral videos back then, a lot of them were directed by him. So yeah, it's a really cool conversation. And as someone who enjoys a lot of those shows, it's like it was just cool to hear like the inside baseball on a lot of that stuff. He did the last thing he did was this thing called Die Hard, which is Kevin Hart's action show with John Travolta as like the bad guy. It came out on Quibi, which was a streaming service that lasted 1 year. It's already gone.
It's already gone.
So like there's no way for anyone to see it. And it's kind of funny to hear him talk to me. He's like, yeah, I'm like trying to pitch myself for like these other roles, and they're like, well, can we see this newest thing you've done? And he's like, I actually can't show it to you because it's
on
like
Quibi.
Now it's which doesn't exist anymore. So he's a super cool guy, and I was very thankful for his time. So that one will be out next week.
That's so rad. It's really cool to think that the dude who started the Andy Milonakis, or one of the dudes who started the Andy Milonakis show, was directing The Office. Like, that's a trip.
Right.
That's
Yeah. He did an episode in one of the last seasons, and then it's funny. As soon as like I read what episode it was, I was like, oh my god, I totally remember that one. It was
that's sick. That's so sick.
It's pretty funny, yeah. So I'm enjoying it. Some weeks, like you were mentioning, when you maybe sometimes look at how many people are listening to an episode, some are better than others and things like that. And, you can, I don't know if you ever feel like a little bit of a defeatist at certain times where you're like,
most times. Yes.
Yeah. But then when you have a good week, then you have a really good conversation, it inspires you and you want to keep doing it. So to all our fellow podcasters out there, keep it up.
Yeah. Keep your chin high. So does it sound like it sounds like you're going to continue doing it then? And after your real job returns?
TBD, I guess, like it looks like things, are a little bit, we're all, to use the common phrase, nauseously optimistic about the future right now with tours coming back. I would like to continue doing it. I mean, if we got, if we actually got to pull off what we have planned, which is like a few, 5-6 week tours towards the end of the year, I would just rack up a bunch of episodes. So I'm like, I have them already and I can just go on tour and not have to worry about it other than just like posting about it every week. So yeah, I would like to keep doing it. Yeah.
That's cool. I think that I'm a little curious and I wonder what's going to happen with this dearth of podcasts and with, everybody sort of settling into their reality as it is right now. And then what stays, what goes, what's going to happen. It's giving me a lot of anxiety, quite frankly. That's why I'm spending most of my time talking about Deftones.
Yeah. Well, there's going to be, I'm sure a lot of the podcasts started by assholes like me who are just, sitting at home are probably not going to last very long. And that's fine, like clear the room for the people who have been doing it for a real long time and whatever else. But yeah, I mean, what else are we going to do?
I think it's great because it's, anytime you get a conversation between two people that you wouldn't ordinarily get to be a fly on the wall for those conversations, it's a cool thing. So
some of my favorite,
always room for that in the space,
Totally. I think some of my all-time favorite interviews that I've ever listened to online or sorry, how old I sound, on podcasts is, there's a network Talk House, and they often have a lot of good, like, they had like Matt from The National interviewing Connor from Bright Eyes. And I'm like, well, I could take a bath in that conversation. Like, that's totally interesting to me, I remember Chino interviewed, it wasn't for a podcast, but I remember seeing like Chino and like Davey from AFI did an interview together, like artist on artist interviews. Shit's interesting. And I'm not so humble that I can't admit that there's probably people that would be excited to hear, guy from Touche talk to, so-and-so from this band, so I know that that's a big part of my listener base. It's like, oh, cool. That's awesome that like, Jeremy from Touche is talking to, Chase from Gatecreeper. So,
it is,
if I could facilitate that. Yeah.
Continue to. I hope you do. I hope you can see it through to your satisfaction at the very least.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, okay. Now let's talk about Deftones. I'm dying to know,
okay,
when do you remember first hearing about Deftones, or when you first got into Deftones?
I do actually. So in in California. And it's funny, when I've talked to other people, some people across the country were familiar with what this was, and then some weren't. So I'd be curious to ever like look up what, like where the range of this network was. But there was a music video jukebox station called The Box. Does that sound familiar to you at all?
Yes,
Does
well,
that
only
sound like
from conversations on this podcast. I feel like I might have faintly remembered hearing or seeing it, but in the Midwest, I don't think it hit off like it did on the East Coast or the West Coast.
Okay, yeah. So it was like, if I remember, I feel like it might have even been like, channel 99 or some shit like that. But like, yeah, it's as simple as it was. Like, it was a music video request channel. So like, you would see a music video, you'd be watching it, and then in the corner, when someone would be dialing in to request something, you would see the numbers that they're typing in like the bottom right. And if you watch the station enough, like you're like, oh shit, someone just did this one. And this state, and because that station wasn't like owned by, a conglomerate like MTV, there was a lot of, and not independent acts, but like smaller acts that had their music videos on there. This is where I first saw the Corn Blind video. It's like where I first saw like Helmet videos, like stuff like that, Quicksand videos. So I remember seeing the video for 7 Words and just being like, what the fuck? Like, I had already liked Corn and all of that, but like there's something so different. And I'm sure we can get into it. I'm sure you've gotten into it a ton of times on this show about like whether we're allowed to call Deftones new metal or whether they're above that. That conversation is always going to be there. But Adrenaline, Around the Fur, like they were mixed in there. If they weren't, Chino wouldn't have sung Wicked on Life is Peachy. So I saw the 7 Words video and was like, these guys got dreadlocks, like it's heavy, it's whatever, he's rapping in the song, that very much appealed to me. And that record came out in 93 or 4. When was Adrenaline
Was 95, 94,
95.
It's a shame that I don't just have that at hand. It's truly,
no, it's fine.
It's shameful.
No, it's
shame
fine.
is how I motivate, really. So it's
yeah. I want to. You might be right. I think it might.
I can check it. I do have access to the internet, so it's very.
And then Around the Fur might have been 97.
Yeah, Around the Fur was definitely 97. Was it around 95 then? Like, was around the release then when you first saw it? Yeah, it was 95.
Yeah, so it would have been. I mean, that was I think 7 Words might have been the second single. Bored might have been the first single. I could be wrong on that. But the first music video I saw was for 7 Words. And there was a warehouse music around the corner from where I lived. The employees were a bunch of like shithead college students who like didn't care that they would like sell me parental advisory cassettes,
Nice.
So
yeah.
I bought the Adrenaline cassette and just dove in head first. And as much as Korn at the time in my life, like was one of my favorite bands or whatever, like I think I remember knowing that as much as they are parallel, there's something very different and very special about what this band is doing, because the melody in it, the not that Korn didn't have vulnerability, they certainly did, certainly had a lot of vulnerability, but like the fact that you would hear these moments on the Deftones records where like, the sound of Chino squealing during like some of those last tracks, like the really like expansive, long, drawn out, very melodic, those like hearing like the squealing of his voice, like whenever his voice would crack on the record. And you could genuinely tell that like he was pissed on this stuff, where like, I think one of the things that turned me away from metal once I found hardcore and all of that later on was like, a lot of metal, I feel like the vocals are what they are because that's what the genre is expecting. You're just like gonna growl, you're gonna like whatever, like generic stuff. But with Deftones, like you could hear the sincerity in Chino's voice on that first record, and that to me like struck a chord, like raised the hairs on the back of my neck, where I was like, okay, this is different, this is special. And I remember Minus Blindfold pretty instantly became like one of my favorite songs, and is still one of my favorite songs from them.
That's so cool. Were you playing music at this time when you were getting into Deftones? Were you already
Yes, I had a
musician?
guitar.
Yeah.
I always played guitar in bands. Touche is the only band I ever started. That was the first band I ever sang in. But I had like a shitty Squire Stratocaster, and I remember I learned how to play just like the beginning of 7 Words, which is just like like a power chord, and then you just slide the finger one thing over. Yeah, I remember just like learning that intro and being like, oh shit, like, and then I mean, that was also around the time that I learned how to like detune the top string so I could just do bar chords, and you know, like board is just one open one, like dun, 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 dun. So I was, you know, instantly like, I'm a genius. And I remember when I felt confident, I learned how to play the intro to Root, which I'm pretty sure I've always played wrong. but you know, I can even right now, like if I had a guitar next to me, like I could play the way that I've always played it. But I know that if I played it for a guitar player in my band and then I played it, they'd be like, you're doing that wrong. Like that's not how it's supposed to go.
That's so cool.
But it's because I learned it off reading tablature, which can't be trusted. So, you know, tablature is always, like you can't always trust internet tablature. So,
man, I think that's so interesting to think about. I didn't realize that you hadn't sung until Touche, which is bananas to me. And then I think it's really cool just anytime anybody's like, so compelled by music that they're like, hold on, let me pick this up and see if I can work this out. Like that's significant, right?
Yeah. I definitely was playing it wrong. Definitely probably was not in the right tuning, all of that stuff. But I mean, you're allowed to do that when you're in fucking 6th grade or whatever. I was in 7th grade, 8th grade, something like that. I forget. But I was definitely in junior high.
95, 96, like 12, 13 years
junior
old.
High.
Like, just starting it out. Like that's really cool.
Yeah.
So
definitely. Yeah.
And it sounds like the other music that you were into was a lot of what was popular at the time, Korn and I don't know, what else were you listening to when you were getting into Deftones?
Yeah, definitely Korn, Deftones, 9 Inch Nails, definitely Marilyn Manson. I mean, obviously he's not the most popular person in the world right now, which is completely understandable. We're all pretty bummed out about all of this shit. But I found Portrait of an American Family from him that same time on that same jukebox station for the video Forget Your Gun. So like into him, and then everybody, you know, you were basically handed Metallica CDs if you were ever, it felt like you know, like a Metallica CD was basically like handed out to you in junior high if you had any interest in aggressive music. You know, so like Injustice for All was like a big record for me and all my friends. What else? I didn't, you know, all my friends loved Pantera and I didn't appreciate Pantera until later. And I think it's because the ballads in it didn't really appeal to me very much, but the riffs were always sick. Like I could still to this day, like I think the best thing about Pantera without question is the riffs, you know?
You're not going to get an argument from me, that's for sure. Yeah.
But like lyrically it does nothing for me. Like I can't relate to much of it or any of it, but you know, like the riffs in Pantera, and then also finding that parallel later that Terry Date did the Deftones records as well as the Pantera records, and then realizing when you listen to them, kind of if you A/B them, you're like, oh, I can hear it in the snare drum, I can hear it in the chugs, like it's there's some parallels there. But yeah, I was into a lot of that stuff. But, you know, it's one of the funny conversations that comes up a lot on the show that I do, which I'm sure you can relate to as well. Is like, it always feels like in junior high is when you're completely allowed to be a poser of everything. So like you can one day wear, you know, a fucking NoFX shirt. Cause I definitely at the same time loved NoFX, you know, like I'm in Southern California. Another thing that like,
yeah,
if you're from Southern California and you didn't own Punk and Drublic, like you're a poser. You're completely not from here. So like, as much as I was loving the Deftones, like I definitely love NoFX and all that sort of stuff too, and like Green Day, and Nirvana is still to this day like probably my all-time favorite band. So like that's always going to be important to me. So like I liked all of this stuff, and it was at the time when like music on the radio was actually fucking awesome.
Yeah.
That again, this takes us, that's that era where like I feel like the music videos that were just on constant rotation, whether it was MTV or the box, was just like it was like Black Hole Sun, Basket Case, Fantastic Voyage from Coolio.
Yeah.
Like
with everybody climbing out of the trunk.
Yeah. There were, oh God, I mean, just that era. I mean, like Alanis Morissette, like all of this stuff was just
classic.
Music was great,
Yeah.
and even the shit that like I didn't like then, I really appreciate now. Like there's songs that I was like, I definitely probably said I fucking hated it in like 97, 95, 94, that I hear now and I'm like, it's not that bad. Like Wallflowers, pretty good.
Yeah, totally. One headline, yeah, I can get down with that. It's something about 40 that I think it approach. Once you're starting to inch closer to 40, you're like, yeah, this is my jam. This is my jam.
Yeah, totally.
That's totally on point. And the consumption of music was so huge. Like music as commerce was as big as it has ever been. I mean, or it was on the brink of being as big as it ever was. So that really allowed for a lot of the smaller bands and niche bands to come up, and like Deftones, I think to grow, and that gave them a space to mature and to develop, as opposed to being thrust instantly into the forefront like Pearl Jam was, perhaps. Or well, maybe they're a poor example, but a lot of bands that were super huge right away, their first couple of albums, just explosion, right?
And I remember when Around the Fur came out, being in California, like they had such a huge fan base here. And then I think, and a big part of that I think is because like the Latino community completely embraced them, which was awesome to see. And Los Angeles, it's like majority of the residents here. So like you would see people of all cultures rocking Deftones shirts, like at a skate kids, just everyone, everybody just completely embraced the Deftones here. Everybody had the goatee, or just trying to have exactly. You're rocking it.
I'm rocking it today. This is purely by coincidence. I haven't had the chino chin in probably since I was in college, but I've got a 1-year-old, and she's been just pulling at my facial hair. She's been pulling at my beard, and I was like, I don't have time to just do this whole thing. Let me just rock the chino chin for like a week.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, like, every girl I was friends with that liked aggressive music, every girl had a crush on Chino. Like he was like the guy. Yeah. And then and all of us wanted to just be him. So we're like, trying to put on these big ass pairs of Dickies and just looking like an idiot. But
that's
no
so
one
rad.
could ever look as Yeah.
I'm so glad that you had that experience. So it sounds, because I feel like I was the only one though here in the Midwest. Maybe I'm unique in that I didn't have a whole lot of friends who also loved Deftones, like a few. It sounds like all your homies were into them to some.
Collectively everybody was super down. Like there was a band that we were friends with in high school that like always did like covers and stuff, and they were actually pretty good at them. Like I remember like going to see them play at a talent show. They played like Head Up, I think, and it was just like, oh shit, yeah,
that's so cool.
And then the first I saw them, I got to see them a few times early on. They did a tour with a band that ended up becoming one of my all-time favorite bands ever. I'm sure you're a fan of them as well, as Far. It was like a Deftones Far Willhaven tour, which is like Sacramento fucking represent. And then I saw them with Quicksand and Pitch Shifter, and that was at the Palladium, and that was for, I want to say that was for Around the Fur as well. And then like that was like the big tour off Around the Fur. And then the time that came after that, I actually left before the Deftones played because Glassjaw opened, and they had become instantly like my favorite band. And I was like, I need to meet the singer of that band. So I literally like walked out of the show because after they finished playing, and I was like, I'm gonna just go hang around the back and see if I could just like meet this dude. And I did, and developed a relationship starting then with him. But like that's how like that's and just to like this conversation, like it's clear I'm a big Deftones fan, but like I was so moved by Glassjaw like so quickly that I was like I have to go meet this man. And from then I didn't see the Deftones again for like a really, really long time. I don't really know why. I feel like they didn't. I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I don't really remember them touring a whole lot in like venues that were reasonable for me to afford or some shit like that, like post White Pony. I feel like I don't know also if it was like maybe because I kind of found hardcore more like I always appreciated the Deftones. Like I've bought every record as they came out and whatnot, but like I don't know what it was that made that gap between that time and then, you know, even now. And I think I've only seen them literally once since like the early early 2000s maybe, and it was at a festival that we did with them. Yeah. Wow. And that was for me was like, oh shit, like we get to play the same festival as them, and like getting to stand side stage and watch them play. I was just like,
oh, tell me about that. Please tell me about that. What was the festival? What was tell me about that experience.
It was a Riot Fest. It was a Riot Fest in but it was the Denver.
Oh, really? Cool.
It was the Denver one, and we weren't on the same stage, I don't think. God, everything's a blur at this point. But the band Thursday also played, and Thursday and Deftones toured together at some point in their careers. So like they had a relationship with those guys. And so I don't know if they were letting like everybody kind of stay on side stage, but because I was with all the Thursday guys, they kind of just like let me roll with them, and just watching them from the side, I was just like, this is unreal. And one of my favorite things that I enjoyed about watching that performance, watching this like later era of Deftones, is how seemingly they don't give a fuck in a good way. Like not in like a we don't give a fuck that we're doing this way, but more like in a we're just having fun up here and at the expense of whoever. So like at one point I remember Chino ran and full like drop kicked Sergio's bass cabs, and they started to almost tip, and you could see all of the stage people like panic, and then Chino looks at them and just starts laughing, and I'm just like, that's awesome. Like he's just having fun. It doesn't matter, you know, like he can do that. And if it did fall over, they would have to remedy it immediately. But like, I don't think anyone's going to be mad at him for it, because he's fucking, you know, everyone is going wild for them in that moment. He's just letting loose.
That's so cool. That's so I think it's especially fun to hear performers talk about other performers in like that, because it's separate from being then the creation process, then the writing, the recording. That's all. It's like a whole nother like ball game, isn't it? Like being on stage. What do you think? Because there's something singular about what they do, what they're doing on stage. It's different.
It is different. There's few bands, especially these days, that when you don't want to sound too overly dramatic, but like, you know, it almost starts to feel kind of godlike, because they have such a just sort of an air about like the importance of them, you know, like with every step that they take onto that stage, every step can count for like a moment in their career that mattered. You know what I'm saying? Where it's just like from Adrenaline to Around the Fur to White Pony, which changed fucking everything to this day. Still, you know how I know that record changed everything? You cannot meet a fucking sound guy for a tour that doesn't go into the venue and then check the PA. Like that's the first thing. Every sound guy plays digital bath. I've been on tours with so many different types of genre bands, whether it's a fucking pop punk band, whether it's a death metal band, a black metal band, whatever you want to call it, their sound guys all use Digital Bath because it is a perfect sounding song. You know what I'm saying? Like it's and people are going to hear this that probably tour and are going to be like, yeah, that's the realest shit ever. So, you know, by the time they're on stage, you're looking at these people that are like, have been with us for so many years now. And it's like, there's an importance there. And they also don't tour that often. It's like it's an event when you get to see them play. So I certainly felt that when it had been so long since I had seen them. And I'm going to have to check my tickets book, but I really do feel like it had been that long since I'd seen them, and just seeing like, damn, they still got it. It's crazy, you know?
Yeah. Well, they beat the street a ton in the 90s. I mean, they were probably leading up to Pony, and then maybe it slowed down after that. I mean, they're a touring band. They've always been out there. And the fact that they are so comfortable, I think, lends a little bit to what you're speaking to, the ease with which they operate and that sort of thing. But it's interesting too to think about like the different versions of the Deftones that you've seen, and that there was no middle. And that beginning Deftones, though, like that beginning Deftones, those early ones, do you remember the impact of that performance in any way of that? Because I don't remember it being a lot, like there wasn't a lot like that I can recall, like of dude, like straight on top of the crowd like that. I don't know. I'm not as, I didn't come from the hardcore scene, like the experience that you've had in that, which is totally a whole nother thing. Right. But like the live show. It's funny.
As you're talking, I just remembered a story that I have not thought about. Oh my God, this just came to me. So at the Palladium, when I saw them when they for like the big show, which was Quicksand and Pitch Shifter, like I mentioned, I forget what happened. I mean, this was so long. This was like 98, maybe 98. I forget if I wasn't feeling well. Something was wrong with me during Pitch Shifter. I can't place what it was, but I wasn't feeling well. So I went upstairs, and there's like a balcony on both sides, right? There's like a left balcony, right balcony. Right balcony is always like VIP shit. Left balcony is general admission. So I went all the way to the far end and was sitting basically like up against the wall that would have had the stage here, like pretty much like from the side. I was just sitting up against the wall, just like chilling out, probably getting myself to feel better before Deftones or Quicksand played. And there's a door right there. And I remember the door opened, and Chino literally opened the door to like, I don't know if he was just seeing how many people were there or what. It was just like a quick, easy access to like look over the balcony and kind of like look at the room, because it's a massive venue in LA. It's one of our biggest all ages, or I mean, of course it's all ages, but like one of our biggest standing venues, not seated. And he looked at me as I was, oh my God, I have not thought about this in so long. He looked at me as I was sitting on the ground, and I looked at him like, you're Chino from the Deftones. And I don't know if he could visibly tell that I wasn't feeling well, but he just went, "You good?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Cool." And then walked out. And just it was one of those things. I was like, I told all my friends later, they're like, "You're full of shit. That didn't happen." I'm like, "What are you talking?" Like, it's not like we had this crazy big, like emotional conversation. He just literally asked if I was good because he saw me sitting on the ground. But I remember just being so taken back by that, because I think that had to have been the first time that a musician that I admired or looked up to, who I, whatever, like, was personable and kind. You know what I'm saying? So like that's, oh my God, man, I had not thought about that. I'm telling you, in 20 years, that took me back so far.
I'm glad I jogged your memory somehow. That's so rad. That's so cool. That would have tripped me out. That would have totally blown my mind in that moment. I would have been like, oh my God, like you said, that's you're Chino from Deftones. That's a trip.
Yeah, I was just like, I didn't know what to say.
Like, I'm good now, dude.
Yeah, but to what you were asking is like, could I, those early days, like the difference, like, I don't know that I would have been able to point it out, because I hadn't been to, a billion shows. I certainly wasn't like a hardcore kid yet. Like, I didn't start going to like hardcore shows until like the early 2000s. like as like I am like defining myself as like a hardcore kid, knowing the separation between the two. But I do remember them just being fantastic, you know, like high energy, whatever. You know what? I did just realize that I saw them one more time after that Glassjaw show. I saw them at the House of Blues in Los Angeles, and I'm gonna say that was probably off of the self-titled record, and that would have happened because my coworker at the record store that I worked at, his name is C minus Chris Rivas. He was a DJ on Power 106, which is the rap station, like the hip hop station here. And he had like a show that played rap and rock on weekend nights at like, you know, midnight or something like that. But he made the beat for, I think it's the first track on the Team Sleep record. So him and Chino were pal. Like he's buds with him. Like they go back. Yeah.
So
like
I was gonna say, I know that name rings a bell. That name totally rings a bell.
Yeah. He made a beat on the Team Sleep record, and he also like he does like on the songs from the Queens of the Stone Age record. Like he does one of the radio commercials that are in it. He does one of those.
Oh, that's tight. That's super cool.
Yeah. He he DJ'd fucking Dave Grohl's wedding. Like he's a cool guy.
That's a good
coolest
gig.
Guy. And funny enough, he's from Bakersfield and like grew up with Korn and Jonathan Davis. Like that's how I think he probably ended up meeting Chino. But like, but I'm pretty sure Chris got maybe some of us from the record store into that show or something like that. And that was the last time I had seen him. And I'll probably Google after this conversation when that show was. I don't remember anything about it. I don't remember who opened. But I do remember the feeling of like, oh, it's been a while since I've seen the Deftones. Like, I wonder if they still got it, you know?
Yeah.
And they did. You know.
Yeah, the transition from early
Deftones
to old. I think that's an interesting take too, because a lot of people, especially in the live venue, they really want it to sound like the record. You know what I mean? Like people get so hung up on wanting to sound like and maybe this is me just being a little too attentive to message boards and what people are saying in the subreddit or whatever. Right. Because, you know, I'm soaking up all this stuff about the band, but that's interesting that you would point that out. The perfect sounding band. How do you mean?
Well, look, there's two different versions of that. Like there's perfect sounding band to where I don't think you should. I personally don't think you should go to a concert expecting it to sound like the record, because if you did, you should stay home and listen to the record.
Yeah, right.
You know, like
no doubt. Couldn't agree more.
It's like what you want to pay some odd dollars to just what you could do at your house. Like, no, you're here for an experience, right? And Deftones, the thing that comes to mind when I think about them live is just how loud they are and like how grainy it is, you know, like Steph's guitars are always just so crunchy, and whomever was playing bass, whether it was Chi, rest in peace, or Sergio, you know, like it's just fucking it's abrasive, you know. And Chino's not gonna sing everything where he's supposed to, you know. There's a lot of improvising. I don't know what I'm trying to say. A lot of improvising where he's like, you know, all of a sudden he's just gonna scream a whole part, or maybe he's not gonna do a part at all because he's doing something else. Like that's interesting to me. So that to me is an awesome sounding band when it's like kind of like in, you know, it's to use the corny ass term, like it's like literally like melting your face, or you're just like, Jesus Christ, it's like it's so much, you know. Yeah. Because nothing bums me out more than, you know, being in the position that I'm in, where I'm lucky enough to be able to stand side stage for a lot of shows and stuff, and like I am immediately bummed out and turned off when I go to stand side stage to watch a band play and they all have in-ear monitors and their amps aren't even like turned up on stage. Like they have like little amps that are just mic'd and they can hear it. And it's pumped out there. It sounds loud out there, but like, it feels so completely like just detached and like lifeless on stage, you know? And you're like, how do you enjoy this? Like you got into this music to like fucking be crazy and loud and whatever. It's like, you know, and they just never were like that. It was just always so loud and so abrasive.
That's so cool. That's interesting to think about. And I think you're right. Even when they are celebrated for being, for having the softer side as well, you know what I mean? For
Yeah.
that contrast, I think that it is worth paying attention just to how big and loud and massive, especially in the live setting. Like you want that. You want to feel it. You want to experience
Yeah.
it.
And I have to imagine it comes from, because I know Chino's a big fan of like a lot of like the, classic like shoegaze stuff. It's like I'm sure he's a big My Bloody Valentine fan and all that stuff. And like those bands made their staple by being so fucking loud, like permanent ear damage after you see them play. So I'm sure that plays a role in what they want to do live.
I wonder too, speaking of that, of damage, it's occurred to me during the recording of this season that like we were really close to losing Deftones around White Pony because of the damage that Chino was doing to his vocals. And as somebody who, like, it sounds like you're shredding your voice when you're like, you're the emotion and everything that you're talking about with Chino that comes through. Like I hear that in your voice too. How do you take care of your instrument? Like how do you how do you pull that off?
Yeah, well, as people are listening, they're probably saying, "Well, listen to his voice; it sounds like shit." But like, I've always had like a very gravelly, like, straining sounding voice. Like this is just who I am. Just on whenever I'm interviewed on tour, it's always a bit worse because I'm obviously on tour yelling every night.
Yeah.
I don't have advice whenever people ask, like, how do I, like, give me advice on how to sing. I'm just like, you just got to do it until you figure out what works for you, I've definitely done my best to do what you're quote unquote supposed to do, which is, like, try to yell from your stomach and not from your head, because like it's between live and studio, like, for instance, this band Soul Glow that I'm friends with put out one of their records on my label. They were just doing a bunch of demos, and like the singer Pierce, he hit me up and was like, dude, I've got to do vocals like for like 10 hours a day. I'm gonna have like the most raging headache. And I remember that, like, when you're in the studio, like you could have, it's one of those things you got to work through. It's like you have headphones on and shit's like blasting through your headphones, like what you're listening to, and then you're screaming on top of it into a microphone that you're recording with. And like when you're doing that, you're unaware of how loud you're actually being because you have what you're listening to in your headphones, and then you're yelling on top of that. So like you're definitely overdoing it way more than you'd be doing it if you were just like live with your band. You know what I'm saying? Like, because you're unaware of your surroundings, and like it's like you're not competing with shit in this room. All you're doing is yelling, Yeah. So like that can be very quick to give you a massive headache. And
oh man,
it's an interesting thing. And I've definitely, our second record, Parting the Sea, I had to track that whole thing in a day, and the headache that I had was I wouldn't put on my worst enemy. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just like in the moment. We had a very small recording window to do that record, and it was tough. But yeah, as for live, it's like you just try to do your best to. I think the best advice I can give, if you're lucky to be in a venue that has monitors where you can like hear yourself, when you start out, you're playing a lot of like, whether you're playing squats or, Veterans Hall, DIY spaces, house shows, whatever, you're probably not going to have a monitor for that. But like, if you get to start playing actual, venues, make use of those floor monitors. Cause as soon as you can hear yourself, like it just like you're less prone to try to like overdo yourself. It's always when you can't hear yourself in any circumstances when you're going to fuck yourself up. I think the best advice is try to just be able to hear yourself.
Yeah, no doubt. It's interesting to think of in the live venue when you finally get to hear yourself versus the recording where all you can do is hear yourself and you're sort of in a vacuum. Like that's really,
yes.
And then the effect that, as somebody I'm only talking into a mic, but I know exactly what it means to take one headphone off and then you're like, oh, whoa, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like whoa, I'm talking loud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, that's a trip. What a trip.
Yeah.
Okay. We're creeping up on an hour, so I'm gonna hit you with some rapid fire stuff.
Okay.
Favorite Deftones album?
Go back and forth on this. The obvious answer would be White Pony because it is what it is. It's a staple, it's a landmark, it does everything you want. It has far and away the best slow songs that they ever wrote in their career that are my favorite songs on the record. For that, I go there. But for nostalgia and for all of that, I really do love Adrenaline a lot. And I know that's like a pretty wild thing. You know, whenever I've talked to big Deftones fans, they're always shocked when I would even put that in my top three, you know? But Adrenaline, Around the Fur, and White Pony are always going to be my trifecta. But I think I would go White Pony with Adrenaline as a close second. And that's not to take away anything from Around the Fur, because Around the Fur is a flawless record. It's just, it was the in between between when I found them and then when they became everything I wanted them to be.
That's cool. That's a really cool way to put it too. Do you have a favorite Deftones song?
I'm gonna pull out a deep cut.
Nice.
I'm gonna pull out a deep cut. I'm gonna. I don't know that it's my favorite, but because it might be too tough to say what my favorite song is, because I would probably lean to a mellow one on White Pony. But for the aggressive sake, just for the fun of this conversation, for the fun of the podcast, Teething, the Crow City of Angels soundtrack version of Teething is so good. And I remember seeing that movie in the theater, knowing that the Deftones were going to have a cameo in it, and just like losing my mind, being like, holy shit, like that's so cool, they're in this movie.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that cover, or not cover, that version, because there was the demo version or whatever that was on like the Linus EP demo or whatever. It's cool, but that Crow City of Angels version is so good.
Not for nothing, that soundtrack's pretty great. It's not as good as the first Crow soundtrack. I mean, it's hard to top the film, and the second film was not great at all, but the first
not
film,
so hot.
Man, what a tremendous achievement in film and soundtrack, that first Crow. So I'm glad that they really kind of went for it with the second soundtrack. You know what I mean? That's always
yeah,
nice.
Definitely.
Okay, I saw on social media you put Ohms as your third favorite album of the year. Why not number one? No, I'm just kidding. What did you what did you like about Ohms?
So every year I do a podcast with two of my best friends that I've been doing like year-end lists with since literally like 2001 or something. Cool. So one of them has a podcast, so we always get together on his podcast and go through our year-end lists and talk about it. And a big reoccurring theme on a lot of our lists was something that felt safe and something that felt comforting during such a shitty year. So because of that, we got records from, that's why records like Bright Eyes made my list pretty high. I forget who else was on it at this point. I can't rack my brain, but like the Deftones putting out a record during such a shitty year, and it has the sound that you love. It has the sound that you come to expect from such a great band. Like, it just felt great to be like, I have a Deftones record during such a shitty year, and it's just there to remind me of what makes a band good. And it's just there to just like, I don't know, get me feeling good during such a bad time, So that's why it definitely made the list.
Yeah, I can totally feel that. That's the whole reason I started this podcast, is because I went back to the source of things that make me feel good when I'm feeling like shit. And that's what Deftones have been. So I could totally feel that. I totally relate to that.
Yeah, man. And just for sake of fun, one of my pals, I mentioned Far earlier, one of my pals, Sean Lopez, who's a guitar player, he does crosses with Chino, and getting to watch, like, just from the sidelines, like that whole project take off, like, those that record and that EPs when those things were coming out were just so fucking good. I really hope we do. I know they put out that random cover a couple months back, but like, I'm really holding my breath for a Crosses record. Did you enjoy that?
Bitches Brew? Yeah, man. Like all of that shit. All of it was so. It was everything that I thought that first Team Sleep album was going to be.
Yeah.
When all of like the stuff was leaking, and although don't get me wrong, like Team Sleep still I think might be my favorite of any of the Chino's non Deftones stuff, but Crosses is like right there. And it's been actually one that I've been really enjoying revisiting over the past year because I don't know, for whatever reason I didn't wholly like just immerse myself in it the way I usually do, like a Deftones album when it came out. But man, that thing, I couldn't agree with you more. Like I'm dying for another Crosses. Anything.
It's so they because they played their first show here at this venue, the Glass House. Like went to that show. They had like the like die cut version of it. It's like hand numbered on the back. It's like I when I saw that they had this, I was like, well, I'm gonna just go stand in the merch line for the majority of the show. But, what a fun band. And it's so funny, like being such a Far fan. Like Sean lives in Burbank, which is my hometown. It's where I'm from. I live in Glendale now, which is a whole like 3 minutes away from there. But I had met Sean once or twice over the years, and was at a Starbucks, and he was standing next to me, and we were like, "Hey, you," and from then became pretty good pals. And like my band, we did 2 records with Brad Wood, who like recorded, he produced 10 Cans of Strings to You. So like there's like that whole connection there or whatever. So like all that stuff stays so important to me, you know, like that whole Sacramento sound, like Will Haven, like El Diablo is one of my favorite like aggressive records. Were you into them at all? Do you like that record?
I was into, and this is probably unfair to those bands, but I sort of always thought of them like as Deftones adjacent bands.
Yeah,
they were bands I just wouldn't have known about had I not gotten into Deftones.
Same.
And I just dug into all of them, especially in those early days of like, you know, well, for me, being in college and like really getting into music and like having access to the internet and getting to learn all of those bands for that reason. Like totally got into all of them. Yeah, totally got into all of them. Especially Far and Will Haven. Those were the ones that were. Will Haven was so great. Far man. Too. Far was great too. Don't get me wrong. Both great.
Yeah, El Diablo is such an outrageously heavy record. I feel like it's lost to time with a lot of, you know, newer kids and whatever else. But you know, whenever I get a chance to hype that record to anybody, so for anyone who listens, to this, go give that record a stream.
I couldn't endorse that any further, and that actually is a great segue into my last question. It's how I like to end every podcast is with a request for 3 recommendations, and this is inspired by something that Chino said on another podcast where he only tweets out links to music like on YouTube. That's the only thing he tweets out because he doesn't think there's anything cooler than anybody could get from him online. Like that's the best he can offer. So in that spirit, and it doesn't have to be music, and could be anything at all that you're into, old or new, Will Haven, whatever you want to. That's you can use Will Haven if you want to. If you want to only pick up 2 more, 3 things that you think people should check out.
So, you know, this is where you're gonna have to use your editing skills to cut out me thinking.
Those are the skills those are that's my primary skill set, believe it or not. The editing is what I do best, I think. I hope.
Yeah. Let's see. Yes, definitely listen to Will Haven's El Diablo. I'm trying to think of something I've watched recently. This is here's the least fun thing for most people probably, but my girl and I we started from the beginning. We never saw The West Wing, and we started watching The West Wing because it's on HBO Max. Yo, it is so fucking good. So I'll say The West Wing. The show about Martin Sheen being the president. It's great. It's Aaron Sorkin, the guy who wrote, you know, Social Network. It's an unbelievably good show. So I'm going to say Will Haven's El Diablo, The West Wing, and go listen to the new Julian Baker record because it's great, and that just came out. So go listen to Julian Baker. Her record's called Little Oblivions. That's my 3.
That's tremendous. I love that The West Wing. That's Beautiful. I missed it on the
Did
first.
you ever watch it?
No. I feel like I was a little too. It was probably in my 20s. Didn't give a shit about why. Yeah.
Why would it appeal to us? Why?
But now.
Yeah.
Give me all the West Wing. Fuck it. I'm dead.
Yeah. Yo, honestly, the best pilot I have ever seen of a TV show. Like,
wow.
We went into it being like, oh, this pilot's going to be rough, like they usually are, especially in this era. It's a fire pilot.
Dude, I'm going to totally check that out.
Yeah, if you're not hooked, keep me updated on your West Wing.
Jeremy Bolm, Touche Amore, Hesitation Wounds, the first ever podcast. He was also a producer for one of my favorite albums of the past few years, Burnt Sugar from Gouge Away, a band that I'm completely enamored with. Thank you, Jeremy. Your podcast rules, your music is fucking epic, and this podcast has been made better because of your contribution. I truly appreciate you, and I also have to thank the GOAT, Danielle Parsons, for connecting me with Jeremy, and from what I hear, beating him up on the Peloton. I hate cardio, man. I gotta find a pickup game, get back on the court soon, ASAP. Once again, my name is Woody. I'm at Woodbruh on Twitter and Instagram, WOODBRUH. The best way to get a hold of me, slide in my DMs. I don't get that many, so I'll see you. Thank you for listening to Deftones. Thank you for listening to Change in the House of Pods.